Some low and middle income Americans could bear the brunt of an appeals court decision on Obamacare. Intolerance and discrimination based on religion debated at a hearing on Capitol Hill. A criminal investigation impeded by the suspects. The Malaysian plane crash site is seriously compromised. And they made life and death decisions while in uniform. Now many veterans need to make their own way in a tight civilian job market. Those stories and more on EWTN News Nightly for Tuesday, July 22nd, 2014. Good evening. Thank you for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick with EWTN News Nightly as we look at your news now. Conflicting rulings from appeals court judges today on Obamacare. The health insurance premiums of millions of low and middle income people are riding in the balance. The Affordable Care Act says tax credits are available to people who enroll through an exchange, quote, established by the state. Does by the state mean government in general or by states that have set up exchange programs of their own? That's the question being debated. An appeals court in D.C. today favored the latter, which would leave out people who signed up through the federal government. But a Virginia ruling later in the day went in the opposite direction. The issue is crucial to the future of Obamacare because most states have not set up their own exchanges. We're joined by Carrie Severino, Chief Counsel, Policy Director at Judicial Crisis Network. Two rulings opposing each other. Please sort it out for us.
Sure. This is what happens in our federal system where we have lots of different circuits who decide things. And this is one of the reasons we have the Supreme Court that ultimately is going to make the call in this case. So we have a conflict now. It's called a circuit split. And it's clear that it's going to be appealed now to the Supreme Court so we can get one ruling for the whole country.
So we talked about how the low and income middle people who apply through the federal government might find that their premiums go up if it goes one way, but there's another side of this. Sure.
There's 4 or 5 million people who are covered by these subsidies that the D.C. Circuit ruled today are illegal because they were not offered through state exchanges. However, there's upwards of 60 million people who now are free of the individual and employer mandates under Obamacare in those same 36 states that chose not to set up exchanges. That's what the plaintiffs in this case were fighting for, to get out from under the mandate. And so it's good news for a lot of people who don't want to be forced to buy health insurance. It's also good news for the rule of law because that's what the text of the law says.
Established by the state, 4 words that are being debated here. Is this really a debate over wording, or is it a broader issue?
Well, there's a real issue of judicial methodology here. Do judges just interpret the words of the statute, or are they free to look at this broader purpose of the statute and change the meaning when it sees necessary? That's what the IRS felt like it could do. They said the statute's not working as it's intended this way, and so we want to change the words. But what the court said today, at least in the D.C. Circuit, is it's in our government, it's the people's representatives in Congress who make those laws. It's not the courts, the unelected judges, who can step in and do that. If they want to extend these subsidies, that's fine, but Congress has to do it, not the courts.
So Obamacare has taken some hits in court lately. Do you think it's going to hold up, and in what form?
Well, if the Supreme Court agrees with the D.C. Circuit and finds that these subsidies were unlawful, then that would be a huge blow, both because a lot of people would not receive the subsidies and because without the employer and individual mandates, there's a lot of people who might not opt into the system. It would seriously undermine the system of Obamacare. This is part of the reason the president's been focusing on trying to get his judges on these courts to decide these issues, because it's really going to depend how we view his legacy. Is Obamacare going to continue to work, or are we going to have to just send Congress back to the drawing board?
It looks like the Supreme Court will decide that. From the Judicial Crisis Network, Carrie Severino, thanks for being with us.
Good to talk to you, Brian.
Now, some of the other stories our EWTN News Nightly team has been following in today's world. Pope Francis is following the disturbing news from Iraq while calling for dialogue to resolve the conflict. The Pope expressed his concern to the Patriarch of the Syriac Catholic Church about the oppression of Christians in Mosul. They've been threatened with death and seizure of their homes if they don't leave or convert to a certain form of Islam. Christians have lived in Iraq's second largest city for nearly 2,000 years. Meanwhile, other Iraqis continue to flee their homes, and growing fears of sectarian violence continue to grow. Various Islamic minorities have taken refuge at a school in Baghdad. Government authorities and local people are providing the refugees with aid, including food and even air conditioning units.
There are about 441 people from 92 families. Most of them are from the town of Tel Afar in Mosul province. They are from various minorities such as Shabak, Yazidis, Sunni, and Shiite Muslims.
The conflict erupted after Islamic militants captured Iraq's second largest city, imposing Sharia law there. Religious discrimination is also hitting Europe. Here in Washington today, experts testified about new threats to believers. Our Jason Calvi has that story from Capitol Hill tonight. Jason?
Brian, death threats, graffiti, just some of the challenges facing faith groups in Europe.
The ongoing Palestinian-Israeli crisis is scary enough for the people living there. But today on Capitol Hill, some argued that the fighting is putting Jews in Europe at risk.
We saw in Paris this weekend, the weekend before, shouts of death to Jews, Jews out, literally besieging a synagogue 10 days ago.
Rabbi Andrew Baker oversees anti-Semitism charges with the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, known as OSCE. And it's not just Jews. Baker was joined by two other OSCE human rights leaders.
Search of the mosques in the last couple of years, we have seen the rise of intelligence gathering on mosques and imams in several countries that have also, I think, violation of basic human rights.
They testified to the U.S. government's Helsinki Commission. The agency, made up of U.S. government officials and congressmen, deals with security in Europe.
That in 3 European countries, Hungary, France, and Belgium, between 40 to 48% of the Jewish population is in fear of their own safety, so much so that they are considering emigrating to Israel.
This Human Rights First researcher is getting ready to publish a document that studies the rise of hate political parties in Hungary and Greece.
Just the other day in the European Parliament, a Polish far-right member got up and started spouting the most vile, racist epithets that you can imagine.
So Europe looks to strong leadership.
I think strong and powerful moral voices play a critical role. And there's probably a few that are so significant today as Pope Francis. So I think we all look to him, and also knowing his own personal experience and the degree of warmth and respect that he has shown to Jewish community leaders.
Not a lot of talk today about Christian persecution in Europe, but in written testimony, one of the experts pointed out that churches have faced graffiti, desecrated cemeteries, and Brian, even arson attacks.
All right, our Jason Calvi on Capitol Hill. Thank you, Jason. The Federal Aviation Administration sets up a no-fly zone over Israel for all U.S. airlines. That after a Hamas rocket exploded near Ben Gurion Airport in Tel Aviv today. Meanwhile, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry is trying to broker a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. He met with the Egyptian president and UN Secretary General in Cairo today.
The loss of lives and the humanitarian impact is really heartbreaking, and we're joining our international partners in reiterating our call for an immediate end to the fighting and a return to the ceasefire that was reached in 2012.
Israel Defense Forces said 27 Israeli soldiers have died in the fighting. 2 civilians have died in rocket attacks on Israel. According to Gaza's health ministry, now more than 600 Palestinians have been killed by Israeli strikes, many of them civilians. Dan Arbell is a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution for Middle East Policy. We appreciate you joining us. 600 Palestinians, some estimates say more than 400 of them civilians, many more than died on that plane that was shot down over Ukraine. But does Hamas bear some of the responsibility for those deaths?
Well, absolutely. There was a ceasefire proposal. Israel accepted. Hamas rejected. Hamas could have ended this a long time ago, yet it chose to continue with the barrage of missiles and rockets on Israel. And when you look at the Israeli situation, then any country around the world would not tolerate such a situation in which 6 million or millions of citizens are under the threat of rockets.
It was only fairly recently that Hamas really became part of the government there, the Palestinian government. Does the government have any control over what this organization is doing, termed a terrorist organization by Israel and the U.S.?
Abu Mazen, who heads the Palestinian Authority, was in a dilemma. I think the dilemma was solved for him. He does not need Hamas in his government anymore. Hamas clearly undermines the Palestinian Authority's position and is hurting the Palestinian cause. Definitely, this is a chance for Abu Mazen, the head of the Palestinian Authority, to get rid of Hamas and to join the moderate camp in the Middle East, together with Egypt, Jordan, and Israel, and to promote peace.
Okay, from the Israel perspective, we want to listen to a moment to former Secretary of State Madeleine Albright, what she says about this.
I do think that the point has to be made, if rockets are being shot at Israel, that Israel does have a right to defend itself.
Dan, do you agree or disagree?
Clearly, Israel has the right to self-defense, recognized by the entire international community. As I said, no country would sit idly by as its citizens are being constantly bombarded. You know, the number of casualties, which is high in Gaza, is also pretty high in Israel. And the suffering of Israelis may not be seen, but they are constantly running into bomb shelters back and forth for days now. And so Israel wants quiet, and I think that once quiet is achieved, then we can go back to normal.
So the Secretary of State is there in Cairo. What can and should the U.S. be doing here?
Well, again, a ceasefire was proposed last week. Hamas rejected. John Kerry has his work cut out for him, together with the Secretary General of the UN, together with the Egyptians. It's very hard to find common ground here, especially when you're talking about an organization like Hamas, who, like Al-Qaeda or the Islamic State in Iraq, has no resolvable grievance that you can actually reason with.
A lot to work with. Thank you for helping us out. Dan Arbell,
Thank you.
We appreciate you.
Thanks.
Now on to our other big international story. Russian President Vladimir Putin says Moscow will do everything in its power to help in the investigation into the shooting down of Malaysia Airlines Flight 17. Putin, however, defiantly blasted Kiev in the West, blaming them for escalating the conflict. During a meeting with Russia's Security Council in Moscow, he condemned Kiev for continuing to shell parts of the region. He asserted that international observers on the scene could, quote, barely stick their heads out, end quote, because of safety concerns.
No matter what our foreign colleagues are saying, we see what is really going on. The number of NATO troops on the territory of Eastern Europe states is being demonstratively reinforced, including the regions of the Baltic and Black Seas. The scale of intensity of military training is also rising. In this regard, there is a need to implement fully and on time all the planned measures to boost our defense.
Putin's comments come a day after President Obama called on Russia to stop backing militants in eastern Ukraine who are suspected of shooting down the plane and then impeding the investigation at the crash site. Today, those pro-Russian rebels did take one important step, handing over the flight data and cockpit voice recorders to investigators. But the international community still has many questions and concerns about the apparent missile strike that downed the plane. Our Wyatt Goolsby has more.
Investigators will analyze the flight records from MH17 to get a better idea of what happened to the plane. Pro-Russian rebels gave the records to Malaysian officials earlier today, days after the crash that killed nearly 300 people. As to whether the black boxes might have been tampered with, experts say that's highly unlikely.
You can't go in and fool around with the data and move data points around. If there was any kind of attempt to alter them, investigators would know immediately.
But if the plane was indeed shot down, as the U.S. government claims, the flight data and voice records alone won't show who was responsible.
Not everyone has been supporting a real investigation into this crime. If they were, international experts would have had unimpeded access to the crime scene, and all of the wreckage would have been left where it had fallen.
As rebels continue to deny responsibility, a man whose grandson died on Flight 17 blames them, blames Russia, and blames Ukraine.
I'm very angry about the whole situation. And I'm not really only angry with the rebellion club, but also with the Ukrainian government, who had been too weak after 3 months not to be able to silence the rebellion.
Meanwhile, Dutch inspectors said they were more or less satisfied with how the bodies of the dead loaded on a train were being stored. The remains of the majority of the victims will now be analyzed for their identification. Wyatt Goolsby, EWTN News Nightly.
Thank you, Wyatt. For the first time, Nigeria's president is meeting with the parents of the now 219 kidnapped schoolgirls that are still being held and their classmates who were able to escape. That meeting comes after some parents refused to meet President Goodluck Jonathan last week. Some of the classmates described how they escaped from their Islamic extremist captors. The group Boko Haram is demanding detained fighters in exchange for the rest of the kidnapped girls. President Jonathan assured the group of his determination to help. There's been international criticism of the Nigerian president for not quickly doing something to try to rescue the kidnapped schoolgirls. Former Procter & Gamble executive Robert McDonald is one step closer to heading up the Veterans Affairs Department. McDonald answered questions here in Washington today posed by the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee. The thrust of the topics and the questions, the disorganization of the Veterans Affairs Department. McDonald, of course, has a business background. He is the second businessman to be approached for that position. House Speaker John Boehner says efforts to address the border crisis are in serious jeopardy. He's blaming President Obama for not seeking a bipartisan solution to the problem. Meanwhile, Texas Governor Rick Perry is taking his own approach to the illegal immigrant surge. He's deploying hundreds of National Guard troops to the border to confront the criminals who exploit undocumented children. Perry says the White House's failure to act leaves him no option in securing his state's border with Mexico.
This idea that somehow or another there's a militarization going on is frankly a little offensive to the folks of the National Guard who travel to the border on regular basis to help. And this is about border security.
The deployment will cost Texas an estimated $12 million a month. Coming up, Catholic leaders call an Obama executive order unprecedented and extreme with no religious liberty protections. And the Supreme Court may decide if death row inmates have a right to know what drugs will be used to execute them. The great threat in today's world is the loneliness of hearts oppressed by greed. Today's thoughts from the official Twitter feed of Pope Francis. Thanks for joining us for EWTN News Nightly. I'm Brian Patrick. It's Tuesday, the 22nd of July, and U.S. Catholic bishops and other Catholic employers are responding to this week's executive order against discrimination based on sexual preference. The bishops say the administration is trading the rights of gay and transgender workers for the rights of religious employers. The order provides no exemption for religious groups that object to hiring people who live that lifestyle. Now, the bishop said that the executive order is unprecedented and extreme and should be opposed. With the stroke of a pen, they said it lends the economic power of the federal government to a deeply flawed understanding of human sexuality. Melissa Swearingen works in government relations. She's a spokesperson for the USCCB president. Kelly Fiedorek is litigation attorney for the Alliance Defending Freedom. Kelly, this order applies only to federal contractors. How would Catholic organizations be affected?
Well, not only are Catholic organizations affected, but any faith-based nonprofit organization is impacted by this executive order and all the people that they serve, because the Obama administration has effectively said that we are no longer going to do business with anyone who disagrees with our personal view of sexuality.
So the employers not only are affected, but you mentioned the people they serve. How many are we talking about? What kind of people are going to be affected?
Well, this is really the untold story. The untold story is the many victims, the homeless, those who are victims of sex trafficking, the needy, the poor, single mothers, orphans. So many of these faith-based nonprofit organizations operate based on their conscience to serve these individuals, and they are the ones who are the true victims of this executive order, and they're being jeopardized in receiving the wonderful services these organizations provide, and that's truly the real tragedy here.
Melissa, there's a deep misunderstanding of all this. When the bishops oppose this, are they saying that people who are gay don't have the same rights to work as any of the rest of us?
No, absolutely not. We have a long history of talking about the dignity of the human person, the right to work, where we have a strong history of labor unions, of things that promote the well-being of the person. This is absolutely not about people being less welcome into our churches or less welcome in our institutions.
I wonder if either of you could give me a specific example when hiring a gay or transgender person could be problematic.
Sure. Well, I think partly that's not quite the right question. You know, it's not about an individual's needs always. Sometimes it's about the institution. In this case, we're saying the church should have the right to live out in freedom their beliefs. And we feel like the executive order is impinging on those beliefs and saying you can't hold a traditional view on marriage. You can't hold a traditional view of maleness or femaleness. And we think that's not fair. That's not right. It's a form of discrimination.
But Kelly, don't you think that if a person was hired for a specific position, that this is something that would have to be taken into consideration?
Well, every business should be free. They should be free to be able to hire people who are going to advance their mission of their organization. And that's what it ultimately comes down to, is the freedom to be able to follow, and as Melissa said, in the Catholic Church's situation, their teaching on sexuality, and not to be coerced by the federal government to adopt a view of sexuality that's different from some of these faith-based nonprofit organizations.
So the bishops point out an example here that's very interesting. So an employer who doesn't want a man who considers himself, or a woman, identifies as a woman, to use the ladies' room. What would you do in a situation like that?
Sure, I think there's times that as a religious institution or as a church, you have to look out for everyone's protection and everyone's privacy. And I think we do have concerns of, do you really want someone that's questioning their gender identity influencing small children who may not be ready to ask those kinds of questions? So I do think we have concerns, and I don't know, Kelly, if you have anything more to add to that?
It's a very complicated issue.
It is, and I think ultimately it's important to consider the safety and privacy of women and children. They have an assumption that they will be safe when they enter into the women's restroom, and that's something that should be protected.
I think most people would agree with that. Thanks to both of you for joining us for this discussion tonight.
Thank you very much for having us.
Well, another question we're raising: do death row inmates have a right to know where their execution drugs come from? That is the question that the Supreme Court may eventually take up. A federal appeals court in Arizona rules that the state cannot execute an inmate until it provides detailed information about the drugs that will be used in the execution. State officials plan to appeal the case to the nation's highest court. The issue garnered national attention after the botched execution of inmate Clayton Lockett in Oklahoma earlier this year. Up next, battle on the home front. Many veterans struggle to find meaningful work after their service. And a first birthday is a big deal, but the royals try to keep Prince George's celebration low-key. We're grateful you're joining us this evening for EWTN News Nightly. I'm Brian Patrick, and as tens of thousands of service members return from war zones, they're struggling to find good civilian jobs. One Army vet is turning a hobby into an opportunity. Our Catherine Elliott has his story.
For veterans in small cities and towns across the country,
it's a very scattershot type of trades around here.
It's a shared experience.
I know a lot of friends of mine are having a hard time getting out and finding an occupation, you know.
Van Woodruff had heard the stories. High-paying jobs in his hometown were hard to find. Turns out a hobby at Fort Bragg, North Carolina,
you know, I got my mind off of just being stuck in that rut.
Something he picked up to fight anxiety turned to opportunity.
I call them leather biographies, where I can tell your history, your career on a piece of leather.
A canvas that for many post-military is often blank. At 9%, the unemployment rate for veterans is higher than the national average.
These are individuals who are making life and death decisions out there when they were in the military.
As combat operations wind down and the military shrinks, Georgia alone is preparing for an influx of as many as 80,000 veterans, each needing a job.
How do you take that skill that you learned in the Army and make that translate into a civilian job? And a lot of our men and women that are coming out of the military don't understand how to do that.
At fairs like this one, people far outnumber jobs. There's a renewed urgency for training, preparedness. It's why some veterans like Van Woodruff had to get creative.
You know, I might not own a yacht one day or whatnot, but I definitely can make a livelihood off of it.
A self-made career, hoping to beat the odds. Catherine Elliott, EWTN News Nightly.
Some beautiful work. Thank you, Catherine. Well, finally tonight, a look at a special birthday boy. Britain's Prince George turns 1 today. These are official photos taken earlier this month. He's with his parents at a butterfly exhibition at London's Natural History Museum and appears to be fascinated with the butterflies. Today's newspaper headlines in London hail the prince as Gorgeous George. His royal parents planned a low-key party, just family and close friends, at Kensington Palace. You got to wonder what a low-key royal party is really like. That's it for tonight. Until tomorrow, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, watch again on EWTN's YouTube page. For all of us here at EWTN News Nightly, I'm Brian Patrick. Thank you for watching tonight. Good night and God bless you.